The office lights had long gone dark when Kenny felt her weight collapse against his shoulder. Juliet Crawford, the CEO who made grown men stammer in board meetings, now mumbled incoherently about numbers that refused to add up, about a bed she couldn't remember leaving. He carried her to his beat-up sedan, her designer heels dangling from his fingers, and drove through empty streets to the only place he knew, his cramped apartment where his 6-year-old daughter slept. At 2 a.m, Juliet's eyes fluttered open on his worn couch. She looked at him through the dim light, at this man who'd given up his bed without hesitation, and smiled with a softness no one at Crawford Industries had ever seen. "Is your bed big enough for 2? Kenny's face flushed crimson, his heart hammering against his ribs. The words left his mouth before his brain could stop them. "Only if you're the one beside me." The silence that followed held something dangerous, something that could cost him everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built for his daughter. But neither of them moved to break it. Kenny had never imagined his life would intersect with someone like Juliet Crawford. 3 months ago, when she'd walked into Crawford Industries with her tailored suits and ice-cold demeanor, the entire office had held its collective breath. She was the youngest CEO in the company's history, a woman who'd built her reputation on ruthless efficiency and impossible standards. Kenny was just another face in the administrative pool, a single father who clocked in at 8 and rushed out at 5 to pick up Rosie from school. His world smelled like crayons and macaroni, hers like expensive perfume and boardroom leather. They existed on different planets within the same building, but tonight had shattered those invisible walls. The annual company party had been held at the Riverside Grand, complete with crystal chandeliers and champagne towers that cost more than Kenny's monthly rent. He'd stood near the back, nursing a single glass of wine he couldn't afford to drink on an empty stomach, watching his colleagues laugh too loudly and compliment Juliet with the kind of desperation that made his stomach turn. She'd smiled through it all, that professional mask never slipping, until the board members cornered her near the terrace. Kenny hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices carried across the marble floor. They wanted her to merge with Hartwell Corporation, to sacrifice the company's identity for profit margins. She'd refused, her voice steady but strained, and they'd left her standing alone with a half-empty glass and shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 expectations. The party had thinned out around midnight. Kenny had been gathering his coat when he saw her at the bar, her 3rd, or was it 4th, drink disappearing faster than the others. The bartender had looked uncomfortable, glancing around for someone more important to intervene. But everyone had already left, the executives and senior managers melting away with their judgment and their carefully maintained distance. Kenny had approached her the way he'd approach Rosie during a nightmare, with quiet certainty and no expectation of thanks. "Miss Crawford, maybe we should call you a car." She'd looked at him with unfocused eyes, recognition flickering somewhere in the haze. "You're the one with the daughter," she'd said, not a question but a statement. "The one who leaves exactly at 5. Everyone thinks you're not ambitious." Kenny had smiled, used to the whispers. "They're right. I'm not ambitious. I just want Rosie to have a better life than I did." That's when she'd started crying. Not the delicate tears of someone trying to maintain composure, but the deep, shaking sobs of a woman who'd held everything together for too long. Kenny had done the only thing that felt right. He'd let her lean against him, let her ruin his discount department store shirt with mascara and wine-scented tears, and when she could barely stand, he'd made the decision that led them here. His apartment was 30 minutes away, her penthouse address unknown to him, and locked behind a security she couldn't currently navigate. So he'd brought her home, carrying her up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again, praying Rosie wouldn't wake up and ask questions he didn't know how to answer. Now, in the gray light of approaching dawn, Juliet sat on his couch wrapped in the blanket he'd tucked around her hours ago. Her hair had escaped its perfect bun, falling in waves around her face, and without her makeup, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Kenny had settled into the armchair across from her, too nervous to sleep, too aware of the situation's delicate absurdity. The silence between them felt different now, less dangerous and more curious, like they were both waiting to see who would acknowledge the impossibility of this moment first. Juliet's eyes traced the small living room, taking in Rosie's crayon drawings taped to the walls, the second-hand furniture that didn't quite match, the stack of bills on the kitchen counter Kenny had forgotten to hide. She didn't look disgusted or pitying. She looked lost. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice rough from sleep and whatever had made her drink so much. "This is inappropriate. I should go." But she didn't move, and Kenny didn't offer to call a cab. Instead, he found himself saying, "You said something interesting at the party, about ambition." Juliet's laugh was bitter. "I don't remember much from the party." Kenny leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You said everyone thinks I'm not ambitious. You were right. But you know what I think? I think ambition is just fear dressed up in expensive clothes. We're all afraid of ending up nowhere, of not mattering. Some of us just choose different ways to matter." Juliet stared at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Crawford Industries, Kenny saw her mask slip completely. "Who are you?" she whispered. The question hung in the air as dawn crept through the thin curtains, painting everything in shades of gold and uncertainty. Kenny thought about telling her he was nobody, just a single father doing his best. But that felt like a lie, or maybe an excuse. "I'm someone who understands," he said instead. "My wife died 2 years ago. Brain aneurysm. She was laughing one moment and gone the next. And I realized that all the things I thought mattered, the career I was building, the promotions I was chasing, none of it meant anything compared to the little girl sleeping in the next room. So I stopped chasing. I started just being." Juliet's eyes glistened. "That sounds peaceful," she said, and it sounded like an accusation and a wish all at once. Kenny shook his head. "It's terrifying. Every day I'm terrified I'm not enough, that I'm failing her, that one wrong decision will ruin her life. Peace is a luxury I gave up the day I became a single parent." Rosie's door creaked open then, her small silhouette appearing in the hallway. She rubbed her eyes with tiny fists, her favorite stuffed rabbit dragging on the floor behind her. "Daddy," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "Why are you awake?" Kenny's heart seized, torn between protecting his daughter from confusion and acknowledging the woman on their couch. But Juliet solved the problem for him. She knelt down, bringing herself to Rosie's eye level with a grace that seemed instinctive. "Hi there, I'm Juliet. I work with your daddy. I wasn't feeling well, and he was kind enough to make sure I got home safe. I'm sorry if I scared you." Rosie studied her with the solemn intensity only children can manage. "You're pretty," she announced. "Are you Daddy's friend?" Juliet glanced at Kenny, something vulnerable and hopeful in her expression. "I'd like to be," she said. The morning unfolded with a strange domesticity that felt both alien and natural. Kenny made pancakes while Juliet sat at their small kitchen table, drinking coffee from a chipped mug Rosie had decorated with marker-drawn flowers. His daughter chattered about school, about her upcoming art show, about how her teacher said she had a gift for colors. Juliet listened with genuine interest, asking questions and laughing at Rosie's jokes in a way that seemed to surprise them both. Kenny watched from the stove, spatula in hand, and felt something shift in his chest. This woman who terrified grown professionals was making his daughter giggle over butterfly jokes. This woman who lived in a world of steel and strategy was content in his cramped kitchen, eating slightly burned pancakes and pretending they were delicious. When Juliet's phone buzzed with its 12th unanswered message, Reality intruded with all its complications. She looked at the screen, and Kenny saw the mask start to rebuild itself, piece by professional piece. "I need to go," Juliet said, standing with reluctance that seemed to surprise her. "Thank you. For everything." Kenny walked her to the door, Rosie waving goodbye with sticky syrup fingers. In the doorway, Juliet hesitated, and Kenny could see her wrestling with something, some decision that mattered more than it should. "What you said last night," she began, then stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "About your bed." Kenny felt his own face heat. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize," Juliet interrupted, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that stole his breath. "I meant what I asked, and I think you meant what you answered." The silence stretched between them, full of possibility and danger, in equal measure. Then Juliet smiled, that same soft expression from 2 in the morning, and left without another word. Kenny stood in the doorway long after her cab disappeared around the corner, wondering if he'd just made the best or worst decision of his life. Monday morning arrived with the weight of unfinished conversations and unspoken expectations. Kenny dressed in his usual button-down and khakis, dropped Rosie at school with extra long hugs, and walked into Crawford Industries expecting everything to have changed. But the office looked the same, sounded the same, smelled the same. His colleagues nodded their good mornings. The coffee machine gurgled its familiar complaint. And somewhere above him, Juliet Crawford was probably already in her office, reviewing reports and making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. Kenny tried to focus on his work, on the spreadsheets and emails that comprised his daily routine. But his mind kept drifting to pancakes and soft smiles and questions about beds that shouldn't have been asked. At 10:30, his desk phone rang. "Kenny Foster, please report to the executive floor." His stomach dropped. The executive floor was a different world. All glass walls and minimalist furniture, and a silence that felt expensive. Kenny had been up here exactly once, during his initial interview 3 years ago, and he'd felt out of place then, too. The receptionist barely glanced at him, just gestured toward Juliet's office with a manicured hand. Kenny's palms were sweating. He knocked twice, heard a crisp, "Come in," and opened the door to find Juliet behind an enormous desk, every inch the CEO again. Her hair was back in its perfect bun, her suit immaculate, her expression professionally neutral. For a moment, Kenny wondered if he'd imagined the entire weekend. Then he saw the chipped mug on her desk, the one Rosie had decorated, now holding pens instead of coffee. "Close the door," Juliet said. Kenny obeyed, his heart hammering. "Am I fired?" Juliet's mask cracked. Just a little. Why would you think that? Kenny gestured vaguely at the office, at the distance between them that felt physical and metaphorical. "Because I overstepped. Because I said something inappropriate. Because you're you and I'm—" "You're what?" Juliet interrupted, standing and walking around the desk. "You're the man who showed me more kindness in one night than I've received in years? The man who let a drunk stranger ruin his couch and didn't ask for anything in return. The man whose daughter makes flower mugs and talks about colors, like they're magic." She stopped in front of him, close enough that Kenny could smell her perfume, different from Saturday, but just as expensive. "You're not fired, Kenny. I called you here because I wanted to explain something, and I'm terrible at explaining things that matter." She took a breath, and Kenny saw her hands tremble slightly before she clasped them together. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about Saturday night." Kenny's mouth went dry. "Neither have I." Juliet nodded, something like relief crossing her face. "I need you to understand something. I don't do this. I don't drink too much. I don't cry on strangers. And I definitely don't ask inappropriate questions about beds. But with you, I felt—" She stopped, searching for the word. "Safe. I felt safe. And I haven't felt safe in so long that I'd forgotten what it was supposed to feel like." Kenny wanted to reach for her, to close the last few inches between them, but he kept his hands at his sides. "What are you saying?" Juliet met his eyes, and in them, Kenny saw the same vulnerability from dawn light and kitchen tables. "I'm saying I want to know you better. I'm saying that project I mentioned at the party, the one everyone thinks I should abandon, I need someone I trust to help me with it. Someone who understands what matters." She paused. "I'm saying yes." "Yes to what?" Kenny asked, though he had known since she smiled at 2 in the morning. "Yes to the question you answered," Juliet said softly. "If you still mean it." Kenny thought about Rosie, about his careful life, about all the reasons this was complicated and dangerous and potentially devastating. Then he thought about Juliet kneeling to talk to his daughter, about her listening to butterfly jokes, about the way she'd looked at his apartment like it was something precious instead of something to pity. He thought about what his wife would have said, and he could almost hear her laughing, telling him to stop being scared and start living. "I meant it," Kenny said. "I mean it." Juliet's smile transformed her face, made her look young and hopeful and terrifyingly beautiful. "Then we should probably discuss the project over dinner. Tonight, if you're free." Kenny thought about his schedule, about Rosie's babysitter, about 1,000 logistics. "I'll make it work," he promised. And just like that, everything changed. The project Juliet had mentioned turned out to be revolutionary, a complete restructuring of Crawford Industries' approach to employee welfare. She wanted to implement flexible hours, on-site childcare, mental health resources, and fair promotion practices based on merit rather than face time. The board hated it. They saw it as weak, as an unnecessary expense, as Juliet letting her emotions cloud her business judgment. But she was determined, and she'd chosen Kenny to help her build the proposal because, as she put it, "You live the reality I'm trying to address. I need your honesty, not your flattery." So they worked together, late nights after Rosie was asleep, Juliet in his apartment with her laptop and Kenny's terrible coffee, building something that mattered. And somewhere between spreadsheets and mission statements, between debates about parental leave and affordable health care, they built something else too. It started with small things. Juliet bringing dinner when she came over, learning that Kenny liked his Chinese food extra spicy, and his daughter liked everything with too much cheese. Kenny making sure Juliet took breaks, noticing when her shoulders tensed with stress, and knowing how to make her laugh with stories about Rosie's latest adventures. They were careful, always professional at the office, maintaining the appropriate distance. But in his apartment, surrounded by crayon drawings and second-hand furniture, the distance shrank. Juliet started arriving earlier, staying later, until one night she fell asleep on his couch mid-sentence, and Kenny covered her with the same blanket from that first morning. When he came out the next day, she was making breakfast, humming softly, and Rosie was teaching her how to make French toast the right way, which apparently involved way too much cinnamon. Kenny stood in the doorway, watching them, and felt his heart do something dangerous and inevitable. Rosie adored Juliet. She didn't understand titles or corporate hierarchies. She just knew that Juliet asked about her drawings, remembered her favorite colors, and sometimes brought her little gifts, a set of fancy markers, a book about famous artists, nothing extravagant but always thoughtful. One evening, after Juliet had left, and Kenny was tucking Rosie into bed, his daughter looked at him with those two wise eyes children sometimes have. "Do you like Juliet, Daddy?" Kenny's heart seized. "Of course I do. She's very nice." Rosie shook her head impatiently. "No, I mean, like her. Like how Prince Philip liked Princess Aurora." Kenny sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Would that bother you? If I liked someone?" Rosie considered this seriously. "Mommy would want you to be happy," she finally said. And Juliet makes you smile more. You should tell her." Kenny laughed, his throat tight. "It's complicated, sweetheart." Rosie patted his hand with the confidence of someone who'd never had their heart broken. "Grown-ups always say that. But it's easy. You just tell people you love them. If only it were that simple." Because alongside the growing warmth between them, reality was pressing in with increasingly sharp teeth. The office gossip had started. Kenny had heard the whispers in the break room, seen the speculative looks when Juliet called him up to her office. Someone had noticed them leaving together. Someone else had seen them at a coffee shop near Kenny's apartment, laughing over project notes. The rumors were spreading, and with them came judgment. Why had Kenny suddenly been promoted to team leader? What exactly was his relationship with the new CEO? Was this why she was pushing for all these employee-friendly policies? Because she was sleeping with someone below her level? None of it was true, not yet. But the accusations stung anyway. Kenny could handle judgment for himself. But when a coworker made a snide comment about special favors within Rosie's earshot at the company family day, his restraint snapped. He'd nearly started a fight before Juliet appeared, her voice ice-cold and executive sharp, making it clear that Kenny's promotion was based on merit, and anyone who had a problem with it could take it up with HR. That night in his apartment, Kenny paced while Juliet sat quietly on the couch. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "People are talking, and it's going to affect you. The board already doesn't trust you. If they know we're—" "What?" Juliet interrupted. "What are we, Kenny?" The question stopped him mid-pace. They'd been dancing around it for weeks, this thing growing between them, too scared to name it and make it real. Kenny looked at her, at this brilliant, complicated woman who'd somehow become essential to his life, and decided Rosie was right. Sometimes it really was that simple. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "I know it's complicated. I know I'm not what you're supposed to want. I'm just a single dad with a kid and a cramped apartment and student loans I'll be paying off until I'm 60. But I'm falling in love with you anyway, and I need you to know that before this goes any further." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Juliet stood, crossed the room, and kissed him. It was gentle and fierce all at once, a kiss that tasted like coffee and courage and all the words they hadn't said. When they broke apart, Juliet's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm already in love with you, you idiot," she whispered. "I think I have been since you let me ruin your couch and didn't ask for anything in return. I'm just terrified because I've never been good at this, at letting people in. I've built my entire life on being untouchable, and you touch me so easily it scares me." Kenny cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears. She didn't seem to realize she was crying. "Then be scared with me," he said. "We'll figure it out together." Juliet laughed, shaky but real. "Your daughter is wiser than us. She said it's easy." Kenny smiled. "Rosie says a lot of things. Last week she insisted dinosaurs could have survived if they'd just eaten more vegetables." They stood there, foreheads pressed together, laughing at nothing and everything. And for a moment the world was just them, just this, uncomplicated and right. But the world wouldn't stay simple for long. The board meeting where Juliet presented their employee welfare proposal was scheduled for the following month, and the resistance was fiercer than either of them had anticipated. The senior members saw it as Juliet overstepping, trying to remake the company in her own image, rather than respecting its established traditions. They questioned her judgment, her priorities, her commitment to profit margins. And then, inevitably, they questioned her relationship with Kenny. It started as an insinuation during a preliminary review. One of the board members, Gerald Whitmore, a man who'd been with the company for 30 years and resented Juliet's rapid ascension, made a comment about how personal entanglements might be clouding her business acumen. Juliet had shut him down immediately, but the damage was done. The investigation was quiet, but thorough. HR policies reviewed, time cards examined, witnesses interviewed. And the conclusion was unambiguous. There was no evidence of impropriety, but the appearance of a conflict of interest was damaging enough. The ultimatum came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Juliet was called into an emergency board meeting, and when she emerged 2 hours later, her face was pale but composed. She called Kenny into her office immediately, closed the door, and said the words he'd been dreading since the gossip started. "They want me to choose. Either you resign, or I step down as CEO." Kenny felt the floor drop out from under him. "What?" Juliet's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "Gerald convinced them that our relationship is a liability. He's arguing that I can't make objective decisions about company policy. If I'm personally involved with an employee, they're giving me 72 hours to decide. Fire you, or they'll call for a vote of no confidence and remove me." Kenny's mind raced through options, through solutions, but kept coming back to the same terrible truth. "I'll resign," he said immediately. "Right now. I'll write the letter, and this goes away." Juliet's laugh was bitter. "And then what? You think I could live with that? You think I could sit in this office, making decisions I don't believe in, knowing I sacrificed you to keep a job?" Kenny moved around the desk, taking her hands in his. "Juliet, listen to me. This position is your life's work. You fought for this, earned this. Don't." Juliet cut him off, her voice sharp. "Don't you dare say you're just anything. You're the man who showed me what actually matters. You're the father who puts his daughter first every single day without complaint. You're the reason I wanted to change this company in the first place, because I saw what you sacrifice just to survive in a system that doesn't care about parents like you." Tears were streaming down her face now, and Kenny had never seen her look so fierce and so broken at the same time. "I love you," she said. "I love you, and I love Rosie, and I can't do this if it means choosing between you and everything I believe in." Kenny pulled her close, feeling her shake against him. "Then don't choose," he whispered. "We'll find another way." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure what that way could possibly be. That night, Kenny couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, the same bed that had started this whole impossible thing, and stared at the ceiling, running through scenarios. He could resign and find another job, but the market was tight, and who would hire him with whispers of impropriety following him? Juliet could step down, but the board would just replace her with someone who'd undo all her progress. They could hide their relationship, but after what Gerald had stirred up, every interaction would be scrutinized. There was no clean solution, no path that didn't require sacrifice. Around 3 in the morning, his phone buzzed with a text from Juliet. "Can't sleep. Thinking about your daughter's wisdom. Sometimes the hard choice is the only honest one." Kenny stared at those words for a long time before he understood what she meant. The next morning, he wrote his resignation letter. Not because he was giving up, but because sometimes loving someone meant making it easier for them to do what they needed to do. He delivered it to her office himself, before she could stop him, before he could second guess. Juliet read it once, then looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain and too much love. "No," she said simply. "Kenny?" "No." He leaned against her desk, trying to find the right words. "You said the hard choice is the only honest one. This is my hard choice. I won't let them use me to destroy what you've built. This company needs you, Juliet. Those employees whose lives you're trying to improve, they need you. And I need you to do this, even if it means I can't be here." Juliet stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. "You think I can just watch you walk away? You think I can sit in this office, making decisions about employee welfare, knowing I threw away the man who taught me what that actually means? Kenny moved to stand beside her, close enough to touch, but not touching. You're not throwing me away. You're choosing to fight for something bigger than us, and I'll be there, outside these walls, supporting you, loving you, always. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they were losing and everything they were trying to save. Then Juliet turned to face him, and in her eyes, Kenny saw a decision crystallizing, something brave and terrifying and absolutely certain. No, she said again, but this time it sounded different. This time, it sounded like the beginning of something rather than the end. I'm not accepting your resignation, and I'm not stepping down as CEO. I'm doing something else entirely. Kenny's heart stuttered. What do you mean? Juliet took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was the one she used in boardrooms, the one that commanded respect and demanded attention. I'm going to that board meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to tell them exactly what I think of their ultimatum. I'm going to remind them that this company was built on innovation, not intimidation. And I'm going to make them an offer. I'll step down as CEO, but only to become majority shareholder and chairman of the board. Kenny blinked, trying to follow her logic. I don't understand. How does that help? Juliet's smile was sharp and beautiful. Because as chairman, I'll have voting power, but no direct authority over employees. The conflict of interest they're citing disappears, and I'll handpick my replacement as CEO, someone who shares our vision, who'll implement these policies without the board's interference. She paused, her smile softening. It's not perfect. It means giving up day-to-day control. But it means I get to keep you, and it means these changes actually happen, with or without me sitting in this office. Kenny stared at her, awed and slightly terrified. You'd give up being CEO? For this? For us? Juliet reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. I'm not giving up anything that matters. I'm choosing what matters. There's a difference. Kenny thought about Rosie's wisdom, about how grown-ups complicated things. Maybe his daughter was right. Maybe love really was simple, and it was the world that made it hard. The board meeting was legendary, at least according to the office gossip that Kenny heard secondhand. Juliet had walked in with a proposal that was legally airtight and strategically brilliant, forcing the board into a corner where they either accepted her terms or faced a shareholder revolt. She'd been 3 steps ahead of Gerald Whitmore the entire time, anticipating his objections and dismantling them with the kind of precision that reminded everyone why she'd become CEO in the first place. By the end of it, she'd secured her position as chairman, nominated a successor who was everything the company needed, and made it clear that anyone who had a problem with her personal life was welcome to take it up with her directly. No one did. Kenny heard all this while packing up his desk, not because he was leaving, but because Juliet had gotten him transferred to a different department, one where he'd have more flexibility and no direct reporting line to her new position. It was a lateral move in title, but came with a significant raise, and more importantly, it came with the ability to pick Rosie up from school without guilt. The first day in his new role, Kenny found a package on his desk. Inside was a photo frame, simple and elegant, holding a picture he didn't remember being taken. It was from one of their late nights working on the proposal, Juliet laughing at something he'd said, Kenny looking at her with an expression that made his feelings embarrassingly obvious. There was a note attached in Juliet's precise handwriting. Proof that some things are worth fighting for. Kenny kept that frame on his desk, and when co-workers asked about it, he told them the truth, that she was the woman he loved, and he wasn't ashamed of it. Most people smiled. Some rolled their eyes. A few made comments that Kenny ignored. But gradually, as the weeks passed and the sky didn't fall, as the company implemented its new policies and employee satisfaction ratings soared, the gossip faded into something gentler. People saw Juliet and Kenny at company events, separate but together, and instead of scandal, they saw something that looked remarkably like happiness. 3 months after the board meeting, on a Saturday morning that smelled like pancakes and possibilities, Juliet showed up at Kenny's apartment with a proposal of a different kind. She'd been coming over most weekends, this having become their routine. Her apartment was bigger, nicer, but his was home. She'd learned to make French toast Rosie's way, all cinnamon and laughter. And Rosie had started drawing pictures of all 3 of them together, a family of choice, if not yet of law. Today, though, Juliet seemed nervous in a way Kenny had rarely seen. She kept fidgeting with her coffee cup, the new one Rosie had made her in art class, to replace the chipped one that still held pens on Juliet's new chairman's office. "I have something to ask you," Juliet finally said, after Rosie had run off to play in her room. Kenny's stomach flipped. "Okay." Juliet took a breath, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "I've been looking at houses." Kenny's brain short-circuited. "Houses?" Juliet nodded, her cheeks flushing pink in a way he found adorable. "Bigger than this apartment, smaller than my penthouse. Something that could fit all of us if you wanted. Something with a yard for Rosie, a good school district, space for an office where we could work on projects together." She opened the folder, showing him listings she'd printed out, each one carefully annotated, with notes about distance to schools and parks. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been officially together for 3 months. But Kenny, I'm 34 years old, and I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. About Rosie. I don't want to waste time being cautious when I already know what I want." Kenny looked at the printouts, at the careful notes in her handwriting, at the evidence of her planning a future that included him. "What exactly are you asking?" Juliet met his eyes, vulnerable and brave. "I'm asking if your bed is big enough for 2, permanently." The question hung in the air, an echo of that first impossible night, transformed into something real and solid and terrifyingly wonderful. Kenny thought about all the reasons to be cautious, all the ways this could go wrong. Then he thought about Juliet making French toast with too much cinnamon, about her listening to Rosie's stories like they mattered, about the way she'd fought for him when it would have been easier to let him go. He thought about what his wife would say, and he knew. She'd tell him to stop overthinking and start living. "Yes," Kenny said, the word simple and certain. "Yes, it's big enough. It's always been big enough, as long as you're the one beside me." Juliet's smile could have lit up the entire city. She kissed him, sweet and promising, and then they were both laughing, giddy with the impossibility of it all, with how a drunken question at 2 in the morning had led them here. They told Rosie together, sitting on the floor of her room surrounded by crayons and stuffed animals. Kenny had worried about how to explain, how to make sure she understood this was her choice too. But Rosie had listened to their careful explanation about moving, about becoming a family, about how much they both loved her. And then she'd looked at Juliet with those wise 6-year-old eyes and asked, "Does this mean I can call you Mom?" Juliet had started crying immediately, the happy tears that seemed to come more easily now, and nodded. "Only if you want to, sweetheart." Rosie had launched herself at Juliet, hugging her tight, and Kenny had wrapped his arms around both of them, his heart so full it almost hurt. This was his family, broken and rebuilt, complicated and perfect, chosen every single day. The house they eventually bought wasn't the biggest or the fanciest on Juliet's list. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman with a maple tree in the backyard and a porch that wrapped around the front. It needed work. The kitchen was outdated, the master bedroom small by any standard, but it had good bones and better light. More importantly, it felt right the moment they walked in, Rosie running from room to room declaring which one would be hers, Juliet squeezing Kenny's hand and whispering, "This is it." They moved in on a sunny Saturday in June, friends from the office helping carry boxes, Rosie directing traffic with the seriousness of a tiny general. And that night, after Rosie was asleep in her new room and the boxes were mostly unpacked, Kenny and Juliet stood in their bedroom, with enough space for a bigger bed and 2 nightstands, and all the ordinary magic of a shared life. Juliet walked to the bed they'd assembled that afternoon, running her hand along the frame. "You know what I was thinking about today?" she asked. Kenny wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What's that?" She leaned back against him, solid and warm. "That night. When I asked if your bed was big enough for 2, I was drunk and sad, and so lost I didn't even know where I lived. But I think some part of me knew even then that you were going to change everything." Kenny turned her around to face him, cupping her face in his hands. "You changed everything too. You taught me that it's okay to want more than just survival. That building a life isn't the same as chasing ambition. That love doesn't have to be something you lose, or something you're afraid of losing. It can just be this." He gestured to the room, to the house around them, to the life they were building. "Something you choose every day." Juliet kissed him, slow and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, she smiled with that softness that still took his breath away, the one only he and Rosie got to see. "So," she said, her eyes dancing, "is this bed big enough?" Kenny laughed, pulling her closer. "Only if you were the one beside me." It was the same answer he'd given that first impossible night, when neither of them had known where this would lead. But now it meant something different. Not a stunned confession or a wishful hope, but a simple truth. They'd fought for this, sacrificed for this, chosen each other when it would have been easier to walk away. And as they lay down together in their new bed, in their new house, in the life they'd built from courage and coffee and too much cinnamon, Kenny realized that Rosie had been right all along. Love was easy. It was the world that made it complicated. But when you found someone worth fighting for, someone who made you braver and better and more yourself, you fought anyway. You chose them every single day, and you made the bed big enough for 2. Outside, the maple tree rustled in the summer breeze. Inside, Rosie slept soundly, dreaming of colors and families and all the magic that comes from people choosing to love each other. And in the master bedroom, Kenny and Juliet held each other close, grateful for drunken questions and honest answers, for late-night pancakes and early morning courage, for second chances and first loves that felt like coming home. The bed was big enough. It had always been big enough. They just had to be brave enough to share it.